Welcome to the Women in Architecture, Women's Search for Meaning. This is the AIA Minnesota's Women in Architecture session where we have a networking component where we are able to talk about deeper topics. And so we have invited 6 women to talk with us and to lead discussions based on their search for meaning in and beyond architecture. And today we are starting with Sara St. Louis. Sara, would you like to get us started? Tell us your name, your title, your role, and where you practice.
Great. My name is Sara St. Louis. I'm Associate AIA and ADAC. I'm a project manager for Lifetime.
And where have you been finding inspiration lately?
I think in the news and in the disability community and in my son, which really spurred all my advocacy to begin with.
What about your son has brought this to light in your life?
So on February 6, 2013, my son was a day shy of 20 months old, and his former daycare provider bought a used car seat, which is against the law in the state of Minnesota. And she did not have a license to transport children and installed the car seat incorrectly and wrapped her vehicle around a pole on the side that my son was on. And subsequently, he acquired a severe traumatic brain injury and subsequent seizure disorder, developmental delays, physical disabilities. And so we have been on a journey for the last 10 and a half years, almost 11, on the disability journey and trying to find out, navigate the systems, and realizing how very ableist our world is, and not just in our world, but just even in my own profession, and how very little we give attention to that, and how much architects and designers really don't know anything. What they do know is just following a checklist, and even then, it's sometimes ignored. And I just found that I really needed to change how our profession looked at it, and then just how the world saw people with disabilities, and trying to create a more inclusive world where they have an equitable opportunity to have all the things that the rest of us do. My son has really just been the inspiration. He was the catalyst for where I am today and what I do. I am so incredibly proud of who he is, and he's becoming a strong self advocate, all of himself.
It's incredible to hear you talk about him and how to be able to speak with clarity about what is needed by certain portions of the population that are not being heard.
You don't find a lot of advocates in small children, and to have them be strong about it and to be able to tell their story in a way that invites people in and inspires people to do change and do good, I think is really rare, because I don't feel like we bring our children up. We don't give them the credit that of their knowledge and of their ability to help change the world in a small way. But I am incredibly proud of who he is and who he's becoming, and what he's going to be able to do. Everything that I've worked for and I continue to do is just going to be a larger base for him to grow off of.
So, what gets you excited about this type of work? Is there a project you'd like to share?
Sure. My most recent one last year was getting adult size changing tables into public restrooms, which it took me 4 years, which I found out in the political landscape is actually really quick. 4 years seems like a really long time, but to get a bill through in that short amount of time is considered to be very effective. And I didn't really feel like I was effective back in 2019 when I first wrote the bill. So it came back in 2023, and we started to get some hearings. We went through the House very quickly. And then the Senate took several months for us to get the bill passed. We had to have lots of hearings. There was a lot of organization, a lot of letters to get written, a lot of testimony to be had. And we came about it in a little bit different direction. The way we wrote the bill was to do expedited rulemaking, which, if it was passed into law, would have to be written into code by the Department of Labor and implemented within 9 months, versus just saying we're going to change the code through this. Because after talking to some people within AIA, we found out that Dolly and AIA don't really like having code changed by legislators. And so this way we kind of forced the hand of Dolly to change the code. We had an uphill battle in the Senate, and we really had to convince a lot of people. But eventually we got it passed, and Governor Walz signed it into law in May at a big ceremony outside of the state capitol. And unfortunately, I couldn't be there because I was down in Kansas City for my final training to become an ADA coordinator. All this hard work to get dignity and safe and sanitary places for people with disabilities to be changed, signed into law, was amazing. Like, I couldn't hold in the emotion of such a momentous event. And then I was able to be on the tag team with Dolly to help, like, see my bill all the way through. And so we finished up writing it about a month ago. And so it's going through its final little chapters to start being implemented the first part of the year. So my cohort and I founded Changing Spaces Minnesota, the Minnesota chapter of the national group Changing Spaces. And now we're working with different businesses that would not necessarily have to do these tables right away. We're working with the Minnesota Zoo. Trying to work with the different sports arenas. US Bank Stadium put one in, an adjustable height one last year. And so we're trying to work with a lot of entities. And this year we plan on coming back to the Capitol to get grant money for small and medium-sized businesses that would not necessarily be required to put these tables in, so that to encourage that business. Because the disability community in the US has $490 billion of expendable income. And that's a lot of money. And I would think that businesses would want to cash in on that. But if they can't go because you don't have a place to change and take care of their needs, they're not going to come and support that business. We want to be able to make these be as available as possible.
That is an incredible project to have come to fruition this year, and a great success towards your advocacy efforts. Just wow. So many questions about this, because as a trained architect, learning how to also put something through a bill, how to even write a bill, how to navigate this process, that's a whole podcast unto itself.
I feel like that's a whole program for AIA. How do you do a bill?
Right.
I just want to pause on one thing, though, too, Sarah. And what struck me when I heard you speak at AIA Leadership Forum this summer was the larger community for support that you work within. Can you speak a little bit to that, on how in advocacy work having that community is so important? Especially, I know your bill passed quickly, but in some cases that can take a very long time, and some people don't see results for all their hard work. Can you just speak to, the role of community in your advocacy work?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the disability community is probably one of the best communities that exists. If you need something, if you have a question about something, they're there. They make it happen if they're able to make it happen. A lot of times, things don't happen the way we want them to. There's a lot of inequity, there's a lot of inaccessibility, there's a lot of exclusion of the disability community. And they are the largest minority group in our country. Between adults and children, there's about 80 million people in our country that have a disability. So we're not a small group. And you figure that if each person with a disability has at least two people in their life, now you're looking at 240 million people who directly are impacted every day by disability. And we stick together, and If somebody needs something, they're there. And it's a lot because they want to make life easier. They don't want people that because I suffered, you should suffer. We want to make it, I suffered and I don't want you to suffer. I don't want you to have to go through all these obstacles to an equitable opportunity.
I find that really inspiring. I'd like to back up a little into talking about your leadership, because you are a leader, you're becoming a leader in this role through your advocacy. You're a project manager, so you're doing it in your job, and then you're a mom, and so you're doing it at home. And so what does being a leader mean to you currently?
I kind of sometimes struggle with the word leader. Leaders are people that go out on their own, um, or that they're pushing their self ambitions first. I feel like the greatest people that lead others are those that are collaborators. They want to inspire and empower others to pick up the torch and go forward, to be the most effective in my advocacy, in your professional life, and in your momming life. Um, Personal life on the side is I am a support parent with Family Voices in Minnesota. I work with some of the most traumatic cases, and I take some of the most broken people, parents that are on there that have no idea tragedy happened in their life and they don't know what to do. And they want somebody to listen and they want to be heard and they want to learn and how to move from this worst moment in their life to be able to be empowered to help somebody else. When I work with people through that, sometimes there's people, it can happen quickly, and other people take years to bring along for the journey. Whether that's professionally or personally, it takes time to foster growth. And it takes time to help people realize that they have a power within themselves that can be used for such good. And to help get them to that point, I think is one of the most satisfying things. And it's not about putting yourself first. It's being humble to take a step back and say, you know what, I will meet you where you're at and we will grow together. And I think that that is something that a lot of leaders miss in life, is being humble, willing to walk alongside and get them from their lowest moment and watch them grow and blossom and to an empowered state of being able to do that for somebody else. That is what leadership should really look like.
I think you say it really well, that you look at leadership not as a leader with power, but a leader who empowers. It's definitely evident in how you are approaching conversations and how you're talking about what you're doing in all of these different realms. It's really inspiring. How do you currently find purpose or meaning in life? Is it these goals that you're setting? Is it different for a professional career versus your personal life?
I think when you find your purpose, you live it and breathe it everywhere you're at. I don't think you can separate them. I feel like a lot of people go through life and never find their true purpose. And I found mine through tragedy. Like, it was not my choice. It wasn't um, what I inspired in life. You know, I wanted to just work my way up and become the highest level I could possibly come in our profession. And then when Ezra's accident happened, it just kind of changed the trajectory of my life. And eventually I found it as a blessing instead of a curse. And then it became a purpose. I can usually tell right away, especially when I'm at the Capitol or at some political event. I wear my Advocate Like a Mother shirt. And right away, I can tell if somebody is going to be with me or they're people I have yet to inspire and help change their mindset from one spot to another, especially when you get the disability community behind you. All these incredible people from different things, whether they have physical disabilities or invisible disabilities, or however they come into the disability fold, you don't have to convince them. They know. They live this every day. And to go out into the world and to help change education, to change medicine, to change, government entities, to be able to change architecture is so hard. And when I started this adult size changing table bill, It was because I had to put my son on a dirty public restroom floor. I mean, sanitary reasons alone should be able to say, well, this is, obvious. We should just do this. But the dignity piece, and when you talked about dignity, people just kind of like, well, why should we do it for just a small group of people? And the fact is, there's millions and millions of people who this affect. The average non-disabled male child is not fully potty trained till they're 4 years old. Well, 4-year-olds don't fit on infant changers, right? My children, I gave birth to hardy Minnesotans and they outgrew them at 1. So where's the only other option? A floor, the back of your vehicle, somewhere that isn't dignified or sanitary or safe. When I started bringing this up, people just laughed about it, particularly in the architectural community. They didn't understand that you're having to lay your child or your loved one on a floor. And my son is now fully potty trained, but at the time he wasn't. And I just thought, if I do this for him, how many other people does this affect? And when I put out that call to find out what I was missing for the bill, there were lots of people, hundreds of people that chimed in. And that was just a small group of people that I had availability to. We talk about just human dignity. And what are we missing in architecture when we look at that? We just think about how we interact with the space and not how others are going to interact. And I feel like we just really need to make a conscious effort on not just our personal lives, but our professional lives and changing how we do design and actually include people in the conversations so that we get it right. So I think we make a lot of excuses for it. And I feel like we need to stop making excuses and start designing and start advocating in a meaningful way that we can include everybody in the conversation and everybody in the end product of the design of the building or the space that we do.
It's an audacious goal, but
Yeah.
that's what makes it worth working towards.
Good for people with disabilities is even better for the rest of us. And we should always be striving to do better than that. And that's how I kind of try to approach not only my professional life, but my personal life. And I just feel like it's so simple and everybody should just be doing that.
You're the first architect I know with a son with a disability. How do you find mentors for yourself in this career? Where have you gone to find leadership and support to forge this path?
In the profession, it's pretty hard. Their AIA and architecture schools don't keep track of architects with disabilities. And they keep track of every other subgroup, but they don't keep track of people with disabilities in the profession or going to school. And so it's really hard. You try to Google disabled architects and not really many come up. Karen Breitmeyer, who's going to be a keynote this year, I've been following her for several years and her very unique firm out in Seattle, where the majority of people that work for her are either a person with a disability or a caregiver or parent of someone with a disability. And it's very hard. So professionally, I don't have people in architecture that have ever been mentors. I find my mentors for architecture outside of the profession, within the community itself, people with disabilities. I always had this inkling of like, how can I make places more accessible? I just didn't really, the true importance of it didn't sink in until I had a son with a disability. And our inability to go places or interact with places because of those disabilities. And once I started meeting people within the disability community, leaders within the disability community, advocates within the disability community, whether they were self-advocates or parent advocates, I really started to learn more about how people, what they were missing or what they were being excluded from because they couldn't access a space. And so I started asking questions, particularly of self-advocates or parents of children with invisible disabilities, such as autism or sensory sensitivities or sensory disabilities or mental health disabilities. And what does that really look like? What does that really mean? And you can understand a wheelchair if you can get through, but the thing about accessibility code is it's all based on an average size male that has full mobility of their upper body. And the average male is 5'10" in the US. Most people with disabilities are not 5'10" white males that have full mobility of their upper body and just have to be in a wheelchair that they can completely maneuver by themselves. But that's what accessibility code is based off of. I started thinking differently, like the sizes of people. So, the average height woman in the US is 5'4". Well, you got 6 inches of difference in height, but we still design to that male. When you're in the restroom, those bars are up higher, particularly if you are a woman of average height. For children, it's optional to design accessibility. It says that in the ANSI 117 too, that if you decide to design for children with disabilities, here's, these things. I really had to seek out professional mentorship through the disability community and through the voices of the disability community and actually see how they interact in spaces or don't and what would make their life easier. That's what really drove. My son was a catalyst for the bill, but then I saw just how much that changed for other people, whether it was not just taking care of their bodily excretions, it was also about clothing changes. It was about tube changes. It was about giving certain medications. So this became bigger than just my son, who still needed to wear diapers at 6 or 7 years old. Just seeing that. And then this summer, we partnered with the state fair and a company out of California called Momentum Refresh and brought this mobile changing unit, inclusive changing unit to the state fair for all 12 days. It was life-changing for the disability community. We blasted this out as many places as we could. We did media interviews and stories on this. People came to the state fair for the first time ever because we thought differently about how people should interact in their spaces and their communities. And I would never have known any of this or the need for this if I hadn't found those mentors outside of the architectural community. I would love for us to be able to hire more people with disabilities because they're going to change how we look at things. They're going to change how we design and be more inclusive, be more sustainable, be more equitable. How much greater we could become as a profession if we just thought differently and we sought out mentors outside of our profession. You learn so much more if you step outside the box that you are comfortable in or the box that you were brought up to believe in. And what a world it is out there, and how extraordinary and amazing and life-giving and inspiring in my professional life that it is.
I do feel like we're doing a change in the profession. As architects, it's who are we asking the questions of, particularly with these public spaces. And that's where I feel like your advocacy for asking the questions and doing the research and ensuring that the client is thinking of the actual users who can be using this space in the future and how can this design be better. And it becomes that sort of balance of conversation where, yes, it's client driven and learning from the client, but also that who are you asking those questions of? Who are you putting in the client seat to help drive that design of the project?
And people don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And even in residential, people are like, well, we want to design our dream home. Well, how long do you plan on living there? And, they'll be like, well, this is where we'll retire and whatever. they want all these stairs to get in, these stairs to get up, and, like these not thinking things, the human journey, disabilities is just the natural, normal part of the human journey. And people don't think about it till you have to do it. I mean, just think, even if you just broke your leg, would you be able to get into your house? Would you be able to use your bathroom? Would you be able to, cook in your kitchen or any of those things? So helping people, recognize, if you want this to be your house that you live the rest of your life in, it needs to follow the life cycle of the human journey, and from birth to death and everything that happens in between.
The book I was listening to is about Stoicism, and it talks about Marcus Aurelius and his quote about being able to bear tragedy without pain. And that resonates with being able to plan and design so that if tragedy happens, it's not going to hurt so much to be able to. We don't want the tragic to happen, and yet it does. Mm-hmm. And so as designers, using our power as architects to plan ahead for our clients, that is a wonderful call to action to get people to do a service to society, to the health, safety, wellness of the public and the private, in being able to design in that fashion. Right. Is there anything else you'd like to share that we haven't touched upon already?
I just think you have to move from comfortable to uncomfortable. Because if you're comfortable, you never grow, you never learn, you get stuck in a mode. And you need those shakeups, you need those tragedies. I won't say that tragedy is not painful, but how you learn to move from that pain to empowerment is something that makes that tragedy worth it. It's not that I would ever wish this accident on my son or that on anybody, but it changed the trajectory of my life and my son's life. But in the end, we ended up changing the trajectory of lots of people's lives and how the world turns. When you look back, you see what you actually did. And it wasn't just me doing it. And I think that when you talk back to the leadership thing, you realize it's really not you. It's about all those people that came along for the journey, who learned from the journey, who are out doing amazing things because they were a part of something. And you get to see, like, wow, this horrible, tragic thing in my life blossomed into a field of beauty and wonder and how we're changing the world, even if it takes time. Like, as much as I want to change architecture to be truly accessible and inclusive, I know it's going to take time, and people still got to keep hearing my voice and me be on my soapbox preaching to everybody. But in the end, it's going to reach somebody, and somebody is going to make a change, and somebody is going to start doing things differently. And that's what really, I think, the hope and mission of advocacy and leadership is all about, is that even if you have one person that you've impacted and they start seeing the world differently and start designing differently in their professional life, in their personal life, you're going to keep the momentum going and you're going to change how the world is for the better.
That's great. Well, thank you, Sara. Thank you for sharing and going a deep dive. This got very personal, but it's clear that your personal life has become your personal strength. It has helped define and shape all that you do. It's just incredible to see that sort of cohesion between life and practice and applied. It's a discussion that's not being had, and that's a benefit to this AIA Women in Architecture networking session, is to be talking about what are those deeper passions that give more motivation, that help us make big changes in small parts of the world, because it's kind of where I'm hearing your defining purpose, is that you're making change happen.
Sara, this is just a wonderful talk. It was the best way to start my day today. You're very inspiring. And I knew through your advocacy work, I was very inspired from the AIA Leadership Forum this summer. And I just knew that we needed to share your work with a broader audience. And I know we've done AIA in the past, but if we can even turn a few more open minds during this either this podcast or that in-person session, I mean, that's all we're asking for, right? Is just change, a little bit change. We can open some people's minds.
Right.
So
yeah, and especially when it comes to accessibility, seek out the disability community, because they're the ones that are going to have the right answers, and the answers that are going to make the environment a better space. And we're always allowed to do better than code. So I think that that's really important for people to hear, especially new to our profession. When you have those conversations, it's going to change how you design, and you're going to create a much more inclusive, beautiful space than if you just followed the bare minimum of the code.
Thank you for joining us. This interview was prepared for the Women's Search for Meaning in and Beyond Architecture session. The networking portion of this session will take place on November 13th at the AIA Minnesota 2023 Conference on Architecture. The AIA Women in Architecture Committee prepared this mini-series to share the stories of 6 women and their unique paths into leadership. Our hope is to inspire your own search for meaning in and beyond architectural practice.